Hello, welcome to Loremaster's Lair. I'm your Loremaster, here today to talk to you about the worship of money. Last week we talked about Druma, home of the Prophecies of Kalistrade. But the prophecies outlived Druma, and maybe all of Galarian. We kind of don't know where it currently is. So let us devote an entire episode today to just learning about the Kalistrocats. To talk about the prophecies, we need to add the context of Druma's culture. First point, one of the most important groups of the Drumish were religious leaders called the Speakers of the Pale. They were holy leaders who promoted individuality and who worked to negotiate with the Fae. During the many wars that the Drumish had against the Dwarves, one thing which happened was the Speakers were forced into exile. But they still had a decent amount of pull in the region until the time the Whispering Tyrant took over the island they were living on, but that's the story for another day. Next point. As punishment for one of their many rebellions, Dwarves tried to take away traditional Dwarven comforts from the people. However, the people who scorned the Dwarven rule just took this opportunity to build their own culture, which was against traditional Dwarven pleasures like intoxicants or facial hair. Soon, the history of the white-clad rulers and of the denial of certain comforts would set the base the prophecies would be built upon. The prophecies themselves began shortly after the Fourth Drumish Rebellion. A craftsman by the name of Kalistrade suddenly fell ill, and in his delirium began writing several notes. When he had recovered, it was like he was an entirely different person. He left his family behind after buying out his inheritance, and disappeared for 8 years. And when he returned, he was garbed in white and loaded with gold. And by the time his life was over, his followers would have grown from merely people wanting to match his wealth, to followers with a religious fervor. And as these followers began to meet business success, what was a curiosity became a cult. After Kalistrade was assumed dead, his followers collected everything he had ever written to try to form a single philosophy. It did not work out, and the faith was fractured. That was, until the day they discovered the founder's tomb, where the faithful communed with Kalistrade. The factions all reconciled that day, under the understanding they gained, while those who did not join with them soon found themselves bringing about their own ruin. And ever since, the prophets of Kalistrade have been united in their common goal of eternal riches. The main text to explain the prophecies of Kalistrade is the book, The Prophecies of Kalistrade. 65% of the book is from Kalistrade's own book, the Anthologies of Self, as well as some other first-person accounts. 25% of the book is the interpretations of these writings by later prophets, and 10% are supplementary texts from over the ages. The book is in turn divided into 6 main chapters. Caravans, which tells the tale of Kalistrade's journeys. Seekers, given instructions to the faithful. Scales, which are fables about material gain. Fortunes, which are more tales, but these seem to have a prophetic bent to them. Ascensions, which describes the rewards that the followers can hope to gain by following the instructions. And Contemplations is the section where everything else that doesn't fit the editor's goes. The book teaches a wide range of lessons, from purity of body and mind, meditative techniques, and business advice, to some notable omissions like religious thought and the afterlife. And the book would not be called Prophecies if there was not a variety of vague texts which followers continue to claim was a prediction of their prophet about this tangentially related event or some other one. You know what I mean. Prophets work to perfect themselves, following the prophecies as closely as possible to ensure their success. They dress all in white, covering most of their skin, including wearing gloves to ensure they do not touch anyone outside of the prophets. Outside of touching, there are also prohibitions from giving to charity, of wasting money, and a variety of other stranger taboos, which dictate things like when and in what direction one must be facing to sign a contract. The most well-known taboo is, of course, food, where certain foods are divided into categories of pure, clean, and unclean in a stringent diet. All of this to promote the closeness to the standard and the conclusion laid out by Kalistrade. Prophecies are not the end of themselves religion, but of course the beliefs they expose lead to some religions being more popular than others. Of course, Abaddon is close to the top of the list because money. The prophets work towards self-perfection, so Aurori is another popular pick, though other Aurorians are not as keen on them and the way they do things. Toreg is not as popular in Druma itself, but there is a decent-sized following among the prophets outside of the country. And as for darker deities, well, Asmodeus and Mammon. And as worshippers of money and business, Norgabur and Bismara are of course antithetical to everything they believe in. And as for Pharasma, well, to understand that is to understand one final secret. So finally, we have the ultimate goal of the prophets, the afterlife. The ultimate secret of the Kalistocrats is a ritual, created and used by Kalistrade himself, to replace one's blood with gold, slowly mummifying oneself, and entrapping the self in an eternal mindscape where you, and any humans who are loyal enough to come with you, can live in Eternium. And the real kicker is the size of the mindscape is influenced by the size of your wealth, meaning the richer you are, the better one's afterlife is. No one yet knows why Pharasma has not yet gone after these people, escaping their judgments. But they believe it is currently best to let as little amount of people know this final secret as possible, just in case. Which brings us to the end of Pathfinder. But that means it is now time to move on to Starfinder, where the Kalistocrats still exist. In a way. After the gap, the Kalistocrats woke up like everyone else and needed to decide what to do next. They continued on with the traditions laid down, but now they pushed the idea to the general masses that their faith is merely about purity and the perfection of mind, body, and soul through free choice. After all, the faith can no longer just say, let's be the opposite of dwarves and survive in space. Many parts of the prophecies have been adopted to the new era. When you bring in creatures from many different worlds, you not only need to consider what is pure, clean, and unclean for you, but for their people. When you want to show creatures without sight your white clothing, you need to admit a certain smell, sound, touch, psychic signature, etc. Eternal life is still the main goal, but now technology can fill in for what magic once did. And as for deities, Abaddon and Asmodeus are still popular choices, but the amount of Kasathas and Lashuntas who have joined the Brotherhood have brought in worship of Telebat and Yara Isa. The Sala's control and Nali-Hotep's connections to secrets are also pretty popular. And that said, Bismara and Pharasma are still the Prophet's enemies, with La Shupo being the new head of the underworld. One of the largest investments of the Kalistocrats are learning centers. As not a religion, they do not need to have traditional temples. Instead, each planet's high prophets create and maintain a location where any Kalistrade can meet to talk business. These mainly take the form of learning centers, places where those who wish for a better life can find the resources to start their march towards self-improvement. Though banks, money brokers, and anything which heavily involves money are also common choices. This is also the location where one is most likely to first meet a Kalistrade, because of money. And one of the things I consider my favorite about how they write the Starfinder entries, pop culture. Kalistrades, being rich and famous, have also been noticed when they show up at high-profile events, though some areas they stood out for more than others. One of note is a major clothing label turning the traditional standards of the Kalistrades wear into high fashion across the galaxy. There are also chefs who are working to turn the Prophet's prohibitions on food into the finest dining in all the universe. So in various ways, Kalistrades are in. But when you have as much money as they do, life just kind of works out like that, does it not? And that is today's video. But we are not quite done talking on the worship of money quite yet. Next week we have another God video on our hands, and talking about a completely different kind of treasure vault. See you there.